You think you know why God flooded the earth. Everyone does. It is one of the most well-known stories in the entire Bible. Noah, the ark, the animals, 40 days of rain, a rainbow, a fresh start for humanity. And if you ask most people why God did it, why he wiped out every living thing on earth and started over, the answer comes immediately. Because people were wicked. Because sin had spread. Because humanity had become corrupt and God had seen enough. That answer is not wrong, but it is incomplete. And the part that is missing is the part nobody talks about. The part that most Sunday school classes skip entirely. The part that makes the flood not just a story about judgment, but a story about something far darker. Something that threatened not just the survival of humanity, but the survival of everything God had planned for it. The flood was not just God's response to human wickedness. The flood was God's emergency response to a contamination event. Something was happening on earth before the flood that had never happened before and has never happened since. Something so catastrophic, so irreversible in its implications, that total destruction was not a punishment. It was the only option left. And the answer is sitting in 4 verses of Genesis chapter 6 that most people read right past without understanding what they are actually looking at. But to understand those 4 verses, to feel the full weight of what they are describing, you have to understand what the world looked like before the floods arrived. Picture a world that is ancient in ways we cannot fully comprehend. Not primitive. Not backward. Ancient in the sense of being closer to the original design, closer to the perfection of Eden, before centuries of decay had worn the earth down to what we know now. The patriarchs before the flood lived for 900 years. Some lived longer. Methuselah, the oldest man in Scripture, lived 969 years. Adam himself lived 930. Jared lived 962. Lamech, the father of Noah, lived 777 years. Think about what 900 years actually means. A man born in the year 1100 who lived 900 years would still be alive today. He would have watched the Crusades, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the printing press, the Black Death, the discovery of the Americas, the Industrial Revolution, 2 world wars, the moon landing, and the rise of the internet, all within a single lifetime. In a world where human beings lived that long, civilization did not progress in generations. It compounded across centuries within the memory of individuals who had seen it all. Knowledge accumulated, skills deepened, technology advanced, cities grew, culture layered upon culture within the span of a single human life. This was not a world of scattered tribes scratching in the dirt. This was a world of deep, ancient, accumulated human civilization. A world that had been building for centuries upon centuries. A world that in many ways we have no framework to fully imagine. And it was into that world, that ancient, complex, deeply developed world, that something descended. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Stop. The sons of God, not men, not human beings choosing human partners. The sons of God, a specific Hebrew phrase, Bene Elohim, used consistently throughout the Old Testament to refer to angelic beings, supernatural entities, created beings who existed in the heavenly realm before the foundations of the earth were laid. Job chapter 1. Satan himself appears among the sons of God, presenting himself before the Lord. Job chapter 2. The same scene, the same phrase, Bene Elohim, the sons of God, appearing in the divine council. Job chapter 38. When God questions Job about creation, he asks, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" The sons of God were there at creation. They were present at the founding of the world. They were supernatural beings of extraordinary power and authority. And a group of them, in an act of rebellion that the New Testament describes as leaving their proper dwelling, came down to earth. They saw human women, and they took them. The ancient Jewish text of 1 Enoch, a book quoted directly by the Apostle Jude in the New Testament, describes what happened next in chilling detail. These beings, called the Watchers, descended on a mountain called Hermon. They made a pact with each other. They swore an oath that they would carry out what they had planned together, so that none of them could be held individually responsible. And then they took human wives, and the women conceived. Verse 4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Nephilim, that word in Hebrew, comes from a root meaning to fall, the fallen ones. Ancient Jewish scholarship, early church fathers, and the context of the surrounding text all consistently understand the Nephilim as the offspring of these unions. Hybrid beings, part human, part something that was never meant to mix with human DNA. And they were not ordinary. The text calls them the mighty men of old, men of renown, beings whose reputation echoed through the ancient world, whose size and power and presence were so far outside the boundaries of normal human experience that they were remembered for generations after the flood erased them. Numbers chapter 13, centuries after the flood, after the ark, after the rainbow and the promise and the fresh start. Israel sends 12 spies into Canaan to scout the land God has promised them. 10 of those 12 spies come back with a report that makes the entire congregation weep. We saw the Nephilim there, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers. And so we seemed to them. Grasshoppers. Trained Israelite warriors, men who had survived 40 years in the wilderness, who had watched God part the Red Sea and rain food from the sky, looked at the inhabitants of Canaan and felt like insects. Not metaphorically, like actual insects standing next to a human being. That is the scale they were describing. Deuteronomy chapter 3. Og, king of Bashan. His bed, his iron bed, was over 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. The text records its dimensions as if even the writer could barely believe it. A bed that size was not built for comfort. It was built for a body that no normal human frame could accommodate. And then Goliath. 1 Samuel chapter 17. The valley of Elah. 2 armies facing each other across a narrow ravine. The Philistines on one side, Israel on the other. And every morning for 40 days, a single figure walked out from the Philistine lines and stood in the valley below. Over 9 feet tall, bronze helmet, bronze coat of armor weighing over 125 pounds, bronze leg armor, a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders, the shaft of his spear like a weaver's beam, the iron point alone weighing 15 pounds. He stood in that valley every morning and called across to Israel, "Choose a man, send him down. Let us settle this one-on-one." And every morning Israel looked at what was standing in that valley, and nobody moved. Nobody, for 40 days. Until a shepherd boy showed up carrying a sling and 5 smooth stones from a stream. When Goliath looked down the valley and saw David walking toward him, a boy, young and small by any measure, carrying no sword, no spear, no armor, he was insulted. He was offended. He called out to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And he cursed him by his gods. He could not conceive of a world in which this boy was a threat. one stone. The giant fell face down on the ground, and the entire pre-flood world, that ancient civilization of deep accumulated human history, had been full of beings like Goliath. Not just one, populations of them, clans of them, spreading across the landscape of the ancient world like a slow tide. And here is the question most people never ask. Why did that require destroying the entire earth? If this was simply about violent giants with bad behavior, just stop them, judge them individually. God had done that before. Why destroy everything? Why wipe out the animals, the birds, the creatures that had no part in any of this? Why start completely over? The answer is in the biology, and it connects directly to something God had promised 4 chapters earlier. Go back to Genesis chapter 3. The moment humanity fell in the garden, God turns to the serpent, the one who engineered the fall, and he pronounces a curse. And buried inside that curse is a promise. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The seed of the woman, a descendant of Eve, a human being born of human blood, who would one day crush the head of the serpent. This is the first prophecy of the Messiah in all of Scripture, spoken in the garden before humanity had taken its first step outside Eden. The plan of redemption announced in the same breath as the fall that made it necessary. And that plan had one biological requirement. The promised seed had to come through a human bloodline, a real human being, born of a woman, descended from Eve, fully and completely human. Now consider what the sons of God were doing in Genesis 6. They were taking human women, producing hybrid offspring, and those offspring were reproducing, and their children were reproducing. And generation by generation, century by century. In a world where individuals lived for 900 years and populations grew exponentially, the contamination was spreading through the human population. Think of human DNA as a manuscript being copied by hand. The original is perfect. Every time a copy is made from a corrupted version, the corruption is preserved and passed forward. Each generation that reproduced from a contaminated bloodline spread the contamination further. Each century that passed without intervention brought the uncorrupted human bloodline closer to extinction. And this is where the strategy reveals itself for what it actually was. The enemy did not come down to earth because he was attracted to human women. The enemy sent his forces down to earth because he understood the promise of Genesis 3. He had heard it spoken directly over him in the garden. He knew a human being would one day bruise his head. He knew the only way to prevent that was to make it biologically impossible. If every human bloodline on earth was contaminated, if no pure human lineage remained, the Messiah could not come. Not because God lacked the power to work around it, but because the incarnation required genuine humanity. God becoming flesh required flesh that was genuinely, purely, uncontaminatedly human. This was not random corruption. This was a targeted biological attack on the mechanism of salvation itself. And by the time we reach Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, God looked at the earth and saw that every intention of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. The contamination had spread to the point of near total saturation. Almost everywhere. Almost. One family remained. And here is the verse that most people read as a moral statement, but is actually something far more specific. Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. The word translated as blameless is the Hebrew word tamim. And tamim is not primarily a moral term, it is a physical term. It is the same word used in Leviticus and Numbers, to describe a sacrificial animal that is without defect, without spot, without blemish, physically pure, genetically unblemished, blameless in his generations, not just his character, his genealogy, his bloodline. Noah was chosen because his lineage had not been contaminated. He was the last uncorrupted branch on the human family tree, the last family through which the promised seed could still travel from Eve in the garden to Bethlehem. The flood was not God losing patience with sinful people. The flood was emergency surgery. The infection had reached critical mass. The only way to preserve the one remaining pure bloodline was to remove everything that had been corrupted around it. Not punishment, emergency. And God put the last uncorrupted family on a boat, and he covered the earth in water, and he started over. But notice what happened after. The ark landed. The waters receded. Noah's family stepped out onto dry ground. God set a rainbow in the sky and promised he would never flood the earth again. And then the Nephilim came back. Genesis 6 verse 4 had already warned about this. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. After the flood, after the reset. Numbers chapter 13 confirms it. They were there, in Canaan, centuries after the water receded, which means the enemy's strategy did not end when the flood came. It adapted. It found new entry points, new generations to corrupt, new pathways into the human bloodline before the promised seed could arrive. Which is why, when Israel entered Canaan under Joshua, God gave commands that sounded from the outside like total destruction. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the Og of Bashan, the giant clans in the hill country of Canaan. Destroy them completely. The same logic as the flood, the same emergency, the same war being fought by different means in a different generation. The bloodline still had to be protected. The seed had not yet come. This thread runs unbroken from Genesis 6 all the way to Bethlehem, 4,000 years. Every generation. The enemy finding new strategies to corrupt, contaminate, and interrupt the bloodline God was preserving. And God, flood by flood, battle by battle, generation by generation, protecting it. Until finally, in a stable in Bethlehem, born of a woman, descended from the uncorrupted line that God had preserved through a flood and a wilderness and centuries of war, the seed came. Fully human. Born of the bloodline the enemy had spent 4,000 years trying to destroy. And he did exactly what Genesis chapter 3 had promised he would do. The enemy had heard that promise spoken over him in the garden. He had spent 4 millennia trying to make it impossible. He had sent supernatural beings down to corrupt the human bloodline. He had flooded the ancient world with hybrid offspring. He had sent giants into Canaan to stand between Israel and the land. He had done everything in his power to prevent the moment that Genesis 3 had declared inevitable. And a young woman in Bethlehem gave birth anyway. The flood was not the end of the story. It was the moment God refused to let the story end. If this changed the way you see Noah, if the flood just became something entirely different from what you thought it was, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Most people have read Genesis 6 their entire lives and never understood what those 4 verses were actually describing. The quiet part, the dark part, the part that connects the fall in Eden to the manger in Bethlehem through the most catastrophic event in the history of the earth. Every video on this channel is built to take you somewhere most documentaries never go. Hidden history, ancient darkness. The things written in scripture that explain more about the world than anything you will find on the surface. Subscribe to Eden Uncovered and turn on notifications so you never miss one. The hidden history of the Bible is deeper than you know, and we are just getting started.